Welcome, Harry. I'm so excited to have you on here. How are you doing today?
I'm amazing. Thank you so much for having me. Really looking forward to the conversation and yeah, hopefully adding some value for your audience. And as I mentioned, yeah, providing that free resource at the end for them as well.
Yes. And for everybody who you probably heard a little bit in the intro, but Harry is a CRPS specialist. And this is something we haven't talked about specifically on this podcast. So I'm really excited for him to bring in his knowledge and his wisdom and his lived experience to you. So, Harry, why don't you tell people briefly, because I know we'll pull out details and go into it more in depth about your story and what got you to where you are today.
For sure. Yeah, I suppose instead of defining what CRPS is, it's maybe easier to do that through narrative and really just
Hmm.
explain it that way because it is a bit of a wild beast in general. So for me, it was in 2017 and I was playing a game of sport with my friends and basically just rolled my ankle. And it was meant to be a 6 week syndesmosis, high ankle sprain, return to play, nothing major. And then I started getting this tingling and this burning, temperature changes, color changes, and the symptoms started to like slowly spread up my leg to the point where my whole leg felt like it was on fire.
Mm.
And that sort of kept going for a number of months, and I had no idea what was going on. And then it also started spreading to the other leg as well, and I got this mirroring effect where I was experiencing the same pain in the right foot where it had started in the left, and that's where you really start to think you're going crazy. And um, it doesn't help when you're not getting anything from any medical practitioners because they don't equally have any idea of what's going on. And basically it's just a matter of hitting that with medication and hitting that with nerve blocks. And over the course of a couple of years, I was really just in this state of flux where I didn't have any answers. And at the same time, the condition was getting worse. And I think to give people a bit of context, when you go and Google CRPS on online, which stands for complex regional pain syndrome, there's two things that really define it, and it's largely considered the most painful um, neurological condition that you can endure. And the second part of that is it's largely considered to be incurable. So the cocktail of those two things, that the hopelessness along with the severity of the pain, gives it the nickname suicide disease often,
Mhm.
because it is quite an unbearable condition. And that was certainly my experience with it. I think if we go, yeah, fast forward a couple of years and really just like pushing through that and trying to just survive day by day, it wasn't until I got sent this news article, and it was about this clinic in America that was really treating this and a couple of other central nervous system chronic pain conditions almost exclusively. And they were running something like an 80% success rate,
Mm.
which was completely unheard of in this field. And so a couple of weeks later, I was on the plane over to the US, and to everybody's surprise that I speak to in America, it was in the northwest of Arkansas. And
I was wondering what clinic this is.
and yeah, and basically, I got over there, and yeah, the place was pretty miraculous. They were really treating um, the foundation of what sort of creates this condition in the first place, which is really dysregulation in the autonomic nervous system, and addressing the body as a whole and bringing that back into a state of balance. And it was really unique that they were treating conditions like EDS, POTS,
Mhm.
fibro, CRPS, but virtually doing it all in the same manner, and doing it by addressing the central nervous system and bringing that into regulation. And what I was seeing over there was, people that had been in wheelchairs for the best part of 15 to 20 years, and in the space of 3 or 4 months would be back, not just walking, but sometimes running with full function,
Wow.
and total transformation. And that was the same for me. So, struggling to walk, and then within 3 months was running and sprinting and doing all the things. So that was the first part of the journey, and really discovering what CRPS was, and then
Mhm.
how to work through it.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. And just for listeners, how long was the progression from the ankle roll to like the full-on symptoms? Like what was that like?
probably early stages. It kicked in about 2 weeks after the initial injury. I got put into
Okay.
a moon boot and I lost some feeling. I lost the temperature sort of changed. And then
Uh-huh.
trying to rehabilitate it as normal, I think it was probably within a month or 6 weeks, I was getting really significant burning
Mm-hmm.
and pain in that leg. And I think the initial response was like, oh, well, it's just going to resolve itself. So we'll just leave it, or we'll
Mm-hmm.
just put you on some Lyrica, we'll put you on some neuropathic pain meds
Mm-hmm.
and it'll resolve itself. And that was kind of, I just stayed in that state of flux for a number of months, just thinking like,
Wow.
yeah.
I'm always just so fascinating, right? Like what kicks something into CRPS? And actually, before I ask that question, can you tell people a little bit more? Okay, so it's like, let's go ahead and define it. So
Mm,
CRPS, you've already said, stands for complex regional pain syndrome. And it used to be called RSD.
RSD,
Some
yeah.
people might
Yeah,
know it as that as well.
exactly. Yeah, that's probably been 15, 20 years ago. I think it was probably that got changed. And I
Yeah.
think the characteristics, generally speaking, and whenever you talk about a syndrome, it generally encompasses a host of
Mhm.
symptoms, is getting an injury generally to a peripheral area, hand or foot is most likely. And that the pain and the symptoms far exceed the actual
Mhm.
the response of the initial injury. And it's really just the brain going into overdrive and perceiving there to be a threat when really there isn't anything that's significant. And that just perpetuates. And the foundation of that, it's like the brain needs to be in a overly hypervigilant state in the first place. And then
Mhm.
once you have this injury, it starts perceiving threat. And I think from my understanding, when we talk about the peripheral areas and why it happens there, is that it's the furthest away from the brain, and it can maybe get a little bit confused around what that sort of looks like and if there is actually a threat or not, particularly when it's not in its normal regulated state. And I think the example of that is sometimes given with phantom limb pain, where
Mm.
the limb can be cut off, but the brain is still perceiving there to be threat and pain in that area where nothing exists.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've always known it to be associated with what you described, like the temperature changes. Sometimes you see color changes, like a lot of like the tingling and burning and even it can be like swelling and things like that. Is that always, are those always characteristics or not necessarily?
Not necessarily, I would say, from a diagnostic perspective
Hmm.
within the current medical paradigm, that's the way that they define it. If you're looking for a legal definition, or you were trying to, at one stage I was going down the avenue of potentially getting recuperated for the injury and getting, going down the legal route.
Hmm.
And yeah, they would need that definition from a visibility perspective. But there's been times with my condition when I've had it where I didn't necessarily need, like, have so many visible symptoms, but you
Hmm.
can still have the really intense pain and the significant nerve pain without that. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you said something so interesting about this clinic, which I want to ask a bunch of questions about too, and all the things that you did there. That they were treating CRPS in similar ways as POTS and fibromyalgia and EDS and all these other ones, which is what I have found to be very effective as well. And that like while it can be helpful to have a clear diagnostic for easy ways to communicate, I often find with many of these types of chronic complex pain diagnoses, it becomes less important and it's more about the symptoms and then really getting to the underlying cause because the treatment actually ends up having a lot of overlap.
Yeah, there's a couple of things on that. I think early
Mhm.
on, particularly getting a diagnosis is such a big thing for people, just for them to feel like they're not going crazy or that
Yes.
they're not that anomaly. To be able to, like, okay, I kind of know as a
Mhm.
first point of call. And really beyond that, I don't see so much value in having the diagnosis, because a couple of things, we're going to treat it similarly. Well, within the framework that I utilize with my clients, we're going to treat it similarly regardless of what the actual symptomatology is, because we're dealing with the underlying conditions that have created that in the first place, and the symptoms can manifest differently in different people, but that's not so much the important part. The second part of that is really people can attach their identity to their diagnosis, and they get very stuck in the state of this is me, I am this, I am a CRPS sufferer. And that identity piece can be hard to shake because for myself, I'm a very significance driven person. So even like I wasn't able to achieve in other areas of my life when I got sick. And it was almost my significance got attached to my illness or my diagnosis. And then that was kind of my identity for a while. And that's the other piece for me where it's like, let's see if we can just let go of that a little bit.
Yes, yes. I think that's so important. Yeah, I find the diagnosis, especially when, and I'm so curious, right? If we lived in like a totally different world with a very different medical system, I don't think the need for the diagnosis would be there if people were treated like with empathy and their symptoms were taken seriously and people like they came in and they were understood. But I think because, and I think you can speak to this from a personal level, you're going from doctor to doctor, people might be not believing you, not taking you seriously. To have that label is like, oh, finally. So it's like this, it's like a step that's almost becomes necessary on the healing journey, but it's like then you got to take the next step and move past it.
Yeah, you find that, and getting bounced around, it's like they all know a lot about a little, but they know little about a lot in a sense.
Yes.
And that can be so frustrating. And then when you do finally get the person that does know, because that's their area of specialty, then you cling on to that. And I think I find it fascinating when you learn more about these chronic illnesses and you learn that there's a buildup of pressure over a long period of time, through a whole lot of experiences in someone's life. And it becomes a perfect storm for this to be the foundation of the illness to present itself. And then the approach to trying to treat it is dealing with like one receptor or like one mechanism, one method of treatment, one nerve block, whatever that is. And it's a total oversimplification of the treatment. And that really, there's a total paradigm shift for me coming to the States and seeing a different approach that I was totally unaware of.
Yeah. And so let's go into that approach a little bit. So it's like, what was this clinic doing differently? And what I'd love to hear both, like, were there things that this clinic is doing that you don't integrate with yours, or have you adopted a very similar way of treating? Like, tell me a little bit, because obviously I know you now work with people with, is it just CRPS or any chronic pain?
Yeah, typically any chronic pain, because we're
Okay.
talking, I would say, more related to autonomic nervous system dysfunction or those types of conditions that we listed off earlier, because that's what I'm most familiar with. But if I'll talk into what the clinic sort of did, and then I'll talk into maybe a little bit more about what I do specifically.
Okay.
So the clinic itself, it's called the Spiro Clinic in Northwest Arkansas, and it was founded by a South African chiropractor who moved over there, 20 or 30 years ago. And basically, Katinka Vandermeer is her name, and she describes her first patient that she ever saw with CRPS, where she trialed basically a manual vagus nerve stimulation technique on that patient. And over the course of a 12-week period, she basically did every day. She would do multiple of these vagus nerve stimulations on this person. And for anyone who doesn't understand the vagus nerve, it's the longest nerve in the body that connects up all the organs, and basically is responsible for those non-conscious functions in the body and largely responsible for inflammation. So she was stimulating this nerve and basically just bringing the nervous system back into a state of calm. And over the course of that 12 weeks, she got this man into remission, and he's still in remission today, 12 years later. And that was the thing that kicked it off. And over the course of 10 or 12 years, she's added a whole bunch of technology, a whole bunch of additional modalities, a whole bunch of other supports, and continues to do so. But the very foundation of it is really stimulating the vagus nerve, bringing that autonomic nervous system back into a state of calm, allowing that rest and digest state to take over, and really built on the foundation of the body wants to be in a state of calm and it wants to be in a state of health. And it's just about removing the blocks to that, as opposed to, when you're experiencing these conditions, you feel like your body's eating you alive, or that it wants to get back at you, or it's some sort of, there's something going violently wrong, or there's something wrong with you, when really there's just something in the way, and we just have to work to clear that out. And that's the foundation of the clinic. But when I was there, we were spending the best part of 7 hours a day, 4 days a week, at the clinic, and doing, I think, on a rotation of 13 or 14 different modalities,
Oh, wow. Okay.
over the time, and it was very intensive. And that's how they generate such consistent and such quick,
Mhm.
turnarounds, and they can get people that are very, very, very stuck and have been for a long number of years, and get them and turn it around in a short time frame because of the intensity of the environment. Um, yeah, so I suppose if I then talk about what I do with people, and a lot of that has been distilling elements of that, and really working on the vagus nerve and calming the central nervous system as the foundation to get people, at least out of, or reducing that state of fight or flight to the point where they can exist a little better right now. Um, the thing that I didn't unravel, and we can go into later, that
Mhm.
that really kept tripping me up, was the fact that I hadn't dealt with the initial conditions that had created the
Mm.
CRPS in the first place.
Mhm.
And that is really around the emotional side of things, the behavioral side of things, the way that I was living, um,
Mhm.
identity issues, all of these things. And I think more so of the general hypervigilance in the nervous system that stemmed from some events earlier in my life that I wasn't really aware of, because I was that person that didn't really have any major traumas. I don't have any of those
Mhm.
big T's. But you realize, having gone through and combing through that over time, that there's all these things that build up and build up the
Mhm.
pressure. And for me now, that was the thing that was pivotal in creating long-term transformation. And I was actually able to get myself back into remission purely using these principles, at a later time when I'd fallen out of it. Um, and now, knowing that, it's really distilling the power of that emotional um, elements, and also combining that with everything that I did learn over there, which is so much, and then providing that for people in a in a practical and also an affordable way.
Mhm. Oh, that's so fascinating because and that was actually kind of led into one of my questions is that um I've always been a little skeptical of some of this like vagal nerve stimulation stuff solely because and I always tell people I'm like clearly I see a biased set of people, right? Like they're coming to me because other things didn't work.
Mm,
And what I have found for a lot of my clients and what I talk about quite a bit is that a lot of times if you're trying to regulate your system, which one of those methods could be vagal nerve stimulation, which I don't particularly use for this reason, is that for the clients whose system doesn't feel safe being safe, it doesn't work. It like actually creates almost more of a tension, and they almost get like a kickback anxiety response because it's like whoa, whoa, whoa. It's like trying to calm yourself while you're sitting in the middle of a busy highway. Like the body's like, what are you doing? We can't be calm. There's threats coming at us. And so I'll have these people who like tried all these different techniques and it's like it's not working, and what we find is this underlying piece of, oh, it's not safe to be safe in your body. And when we address that, all of a sudden then they can go and bring in these other tools a whole lot more successfully. So I think it sounds like you had a lot of success at this clinic and then things kind of caught back up to you and then we're
yeah, and
able
I think
to, yeah, it's just
mm,
fascinating to hear that. And I also want to put in like the when you're in such a state of pain and things are so intense, having something to help bring your system down is probably also so incredibly useful.
yeah, for sure. And I think, if I think within the context of the clinic, like when
Mhm.
people get there, some of them are in this state where they've got seizures, they've got full
Mm,
body tremors, they've got
yeah.
digestive system shut down. They're really on the brink. It's really last chance saloon. And
Hmm.
um, I get what you're saying, and I think when I observe it there, sometimes the response to the stimulation can go either way. A lot of the time, it is bringing people into calm, but then if they're really worked up, it can work the system up even more when they've got that within that controlled context, and they've got so many other treatments and supports around that to be
Hmm.
able to work with that. I see it. It's very different to trying to trying to do it yourself and then having to deal with the
Doing it at
responses that
home,
come.
watching a YouTube video. Yeah, no, I can
Yeah,
see where if you're doing it in that type of like controlled, intensive environment, that sounds
yeah.
much more
And
supportive.
and there's some really easy and simple ways to do
Mm,
it in a manner that's not going to overflood the system as well. You know, breathwork's obviously a good one. I
mhm,
was using a lot of cold exposure as a way to turn on that
mhm.
system again, which is not particularly comfortable, but it proved incredibly effective. Um, you know, and even things like humming and really just calming the system that way, it's not going to overstimulate um, what's already present. So that there's a lot of elements that I still use and I still believe strongly in that sense, just as a way to bring a little more resolution and calm to the present moment for people so they can kind of get a little clearer headspace to be able to work through the things that we'd want to work through. Because
Yeah.
the next phase, when we talk about really going back, and I trained in a technique called the Dr. Espen method. So I would describe him as similar to probably like an Australian version of Joe Dispenza,
Mhm,
where he deals with a lot of quantum technology and dealing with the energetics and purely with the
mhm,
emotion of things. And you know, when I'm working with someone and doing like a timeline therapy or working back through time and really going to these traumatic events and reframing them and working through them, it's an intense experience. So the more present and the more calm you can be going into that, the more transformation you're going to be able to have, because you're really going to allow yourself to be with that experience and transform it. So I see a lot of value in working with someone in the here and now to bring some calm and peace and presence, but really knowing that the power and the transformation is going to come by doing the deep work and going back.
yes, I think you said that really, really beautifully, that last bit, and that in order to do that deep work, there has to be the ability to be present. And, I always, I've had people who come to me who are in a state that is, to me, not appropriate for the work I do because they need that, like that clinic would serve them, right? Or it's
Mm,
and it's actually nice to have this, a resource like that. But it's like, if they can't sit and talk and be okay. I mean, I've had people who lay down during sessions, that's fine too. But it's like if you can't be on a Zoom meeting, right, then it's like what I do isn't what's needed yet. First, the system has to be calmed enough. And
mm.
I think this is a place where people get really tripped up is trying a modality that just isn't appropriate for where they are at their stage of their healing journey and then discounting it, right?
Yeah.
Like this was me with breath work. Breath work is stupid. It makes my system upset. I will never. Do you know what I mean? Versus, no, I first had to find some safety, and I was very much the definition of it's not safe to be safe. And once I did that, now I love breath work, right? But I didn't. It was just not. I wasn't ready for it yet. And same thing. It sounds like you couldn't have done the deeper work without having this clinic to help you calm your system down. And I want to make a point though, is that I also see people applying almost like too intensive of treatments, right? It's like almost somebody who going to the equivalent of a clinic like that when they don't need to, when they actually have the presence to do the deeper work, but it's actually used as a form of escapism from
Yeah,
doing
and
the
I think
deeper work.
that's the second piece of what I would say, what you described around them needing the presence and the
Hmm.
capability to do so. The second piece is the willingness, because
Yes.
people are still in that flux or that state of looking at the doctor or clinging to the medication as like
Mhm.
the golden fix that's going to come and save
Yes.
them. And that's like the case of just saying, well, look, some people just aren't quite ready yet to do the work. And you know, I'm not the person that's going to be there kind of dragging them across the line. It's like I'm going to be there coaching them and giving them the tools and the power to be able to transform themselves, because they have everything they need. It's just that they might need to be made aware of certain things that they already have, you know, and those,
Yes.
you know, resources that are already there. And it's just a little bit of guidance to really unlock what they have. And it's not needing to work with this person forever. It's really just giving them the tools and the power and unlocking a few things so that they can go and heal themselves initially and then thrive beyond that. So I think what you said's really, really true. And obviously there are times where people, you know, and they get into, I see, you know, the degree to which I've seen people that are stuck, they I haven't seen anything else other than the clinic that will really, you know, get them back in that sort of time frame. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. And I think this is, again, amazing to know, like, of a resource like this. When I had my concussion, I went to like an intensive treatment it was only a week long, and it was like 5 hours a day though. And I mean, that was such a game changer to just like get this back. It was like, it felt like it just took all the like sludge off to then be able to do a lot of the deeper work. But I'm like, I'm not sure if I would have been able to, in a very similar vein, like be able to do the deeper work without that intensive, like getting my like nervous system reboot. um, it was at a different
100%.
level, but it was a I'm
Something
not even going to go into what it was because I don't know how to describe it well, and I whatever. But it's like if I had a really bad concussion again, I'm like I would go, because I went to one that was in the Seattle area because that's where I lived. I'm like I would probably, if a week passed and it wasn't clear up, I was like I would probably go and get that intensive treatment again just because it was so successful. And I always will recommend things like that when I know they exist.
Something I'll speak to from that
Mhm.
is around the environment factor, and how crucial it is when you are in a stuck environment, being in a place where you're interpreting the same triggers, the same stimulus, the same
Mhm.
family members that are pissing you off, whatever the environment is, you know, like
Mhm.
that's actually created the conditions for that to exist in the first place. To try and resolve that within the same conditions that it was brought in is a really, really hard thing. And I would say to anyone, like, it is a massive challenge to do so. So the more that you can get yourself out of that environment, the more that you can engage with new people, new practitioners, new information. And in my case, it was an extreme example of moving all the way to the other side of the world into a very different cultural context around a bunch of people who were all on the same mission of healing themselves and all extremely supportive. Like, it's a beautiful
Mhm.
environment there where you've got 35, 40 people that were in the worst stages of their life, having amazing transformations, and the belief that stems from that and the positive energy around that is a massive part of it as well, which can't be understated. So when I speak to people about, you know, where they are right now, it's, yeah, we might not be able to create that sort of intensity, but how can we actually change your environment up, get some new people around you who are going to be supportive, get you out of support groups if it's all it is people talking about their symptoms and how stuck they are, and really actually just getting aligned with people who are going to be taking you towards a better version of yourself and a better future.
Yeah, and you touched on something that I will always highlight whenever anyone does, is the support groups that are not actually supportive. I think often people will find themselves in situations where it's like, well, I'm supposed to do this, or this is supposed to help me. And I think deep down, we all know when something is not supportive. Like when you feel worse leaving, or were actually having a good day and then you feel like crap afterwards, right? That's probably a sign that the environment is not working. And that it can be tough. It can be tough to find a group that is supportive. And I think sometimes people can find it in really unexpected places. And that it doesn't necessarily have to do anything with chronic pain sometimes.
100%. And I really empathize with people who don't have that support in the immediate sphere, because I heard so often about these terrible stories of family members just not believing them, you know, people around them not believing what they had was real because it might not be as visible. There might be some physical manifestation, but, you know, all the jargon around it's all in your head and this type of thing, which, you know, you come to realize with the brain, it's like, well, a lot of, you know, the pain does originate in the brain, but it doesn't mean that it's not real and it's not incredibly painful, and it's not, you know, and it will manifest physically as well. So
Mhm.
I do really have empathy, because I was always in the state where I had incredible support around me,
Mm.
and understanding, but people with just no idea of what to do or how to do it. And, you know, that for me, it kept me holding on, and it kept a sense of hope. And because I knew that I was supported and I was loved, that kept me pushing through the darker nights that I had, you know, and
Mhm.
questioning whether you would make it through.
Mhm.
But I think, yeah, sometimes it's keeping an open mind. And the thing that I think keeps so many people stuck and kept me stuck for such a long time is skepticism, and allowing your current belief system and your current paradigm and your current understanding to prevent you from seeking something that's outside that sphere. Because on the other side of skepticism, on the other side of I don't believe this is going to work, was always the biggest point of transformation for me. And it was always where
Yeah.
the gold was. And it's just, if you allow yourself to just say, well, what's the worst that can happen from me trying
Mhm.
this? Then it opens up so many new possibilities.
Yeah. And what would you say to somebody listening that's like, but I've tried so many things. I have been hopeful. I didn't think it would work, and then it didn't work anyways,
Hmm.
right? I, I'm curious, one, if you had that experience where in the before you found the clinic, were you actively seeking out all different kinds of treatments, or were you in the place? Yeah, okay, so you're nodding your head, yes. So go
I,
ahead.
I,
Mhm.
I tried quite a few things, and I got caught and I got stuck in the place of thinking, I had quite a high level pain doctor who was considered a relative expert in CRPS in
Mhm.
Australia. He was running trials, he was running clinical trials, he was going to get me involved with one of those. All of it was based around trying to find a miracle drug that was going to cure it, which I am highly skeptical of myself using the word.
Yeah.
But I think I can totally understand that state, and I became a little bit despondent and probably almost gave up in a sense. And I think it was the point that I gave up was when the clinic presented itself. And there's probably a couple of things I'll speak into. I think the point you mentioned around, people looking for things, but then it not being the right time for them, maybe.
Mhm.
And just because something didn't work at that time doesn't mean it's not the thing. And it's also the case of looking for the golden cure when it might be the case of needing to stack multiple of these components together. And that for me over the course of 6 years, and as I said, in investing over $250,000 in my own health and recovery, my own acquisition of knowledge, different treatments and modalities, all of these things, was a matter of adding to each of them. It wasn't a matter of switching or changing, because different things that worked at different times, and I still draw on many of these, both for my own wellness and staying on a really great path, but also distilling that for people into things that are going to be useful for them. And it's a matter of giving the person the right thing at the right time, as opposed to
Mhm.
just the right thing. Because there's no golden cure because they are complex chronic illnesses. However, when you have a broader breadth of knowledge, and what I've managed to accumulate over this period of time, I feel really confident in the set of tools I have available to be able to distill that and provide the right thing at the right time for someone. With that said, there's foundational stuff that I think is useful for everyone, particularly around, I mean, we've touched on it a little bit, but really just going back and clearing out the big emotional blocks, the big emotional traumas, the really foundational stuff that's created this friction in the nervous system where, the amygdala, the pain response center in the brain just becomes hyperactive and hyper focused and hyper vigilant off the back of you know multiple events stacking on top of each other. And I think without really addressing that as the foundation, then we're kind of playing on the surface of the water a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And with that foundational piece, and I'm like, I don't know if you can actually share. Well, actually, let me go back to something you said first. The stacking of things, I just want to highlight that too, because I also find that sometimes people are gaining knowledge along the way, or even gaining tools. Like I'll use like the breath work, for example. It's like I learned a skill of breath work. I learned the like how to meditate, things like that. But it's like I couldn't yet apply it. But once I developed this level of safety in my nervous system where I could do those things, then it kind of dropped in. And I find that a lot with my clients who have probably spent years in like mind body world. So it's like they know all the things,
Hmm.
and they're always like, "Oh my gosh," and I haven't gotten anywhere. I'm like, "I promise when things click, it's gonna drop, and it's like a massive snowball effect that happens with these people. It just often you're now working through like so many layers of resistance, but once it drops in, things tend to speed up in their outcomes versus people
Yeah.
who are like brand new and open. they'll usually get results so much faster and like right away and have the more like, oh my gosh, in like 3 weeks, everything was better, type of things, because they just had a more open system and they didn't have all these layers of like beliefs and hopelessness and like, oh, this isn't going to work for me and I screw everything up. Um,
You, yeah, that is such a beautiful point. And I'll speak to
mhm,
when I came back from the clinic the first time, and it was a beautiful transformation, and it was rapid transformation for me.
mhm,
And I came back and had everything back. I was like, I can run again, I can go and play golf again, I can, you know, I felt like I'd fallen behind, my
mhm,
peers, because I'd been out of life for, a year or two. And I was like, let's go and enroll in a master's degree. I want to be a PT so I can start helping people. But I did it from a place of, I'm not, I've fallen behind and I need to catch up. And
mhm.
I want to get back in, and I'm feeling like out of the loop, and socially I was out of the loop as well. And I reached, back into these circles, and drinking was my previous mechanism of
Mm,
socializing, and I fell back into these patterns. And then I basically had, you know, no intention of drinking when I got back from the clinic, because I was in such a beautiful place. But that sense of not good enough, or the underlying condition of needing to be seen, or needing to be back and connected with my old spheres, getting my old life back per se, which I don't
mhm.
necessarily like the term of, because we can have a better and more
Yes.
embodied life, afterwards. And that's what I fell into, and basically had a big night drinking and caused myself a relapse, and I
Mm,
fell straight back into that pit, and I fell straight back into that the deepest, darkest. And it was worse than before, because this
mm,
time there was a whole heap of mental noise and guilt and shame about the fact that I'd blown all this money going to the States, and my parents had to, invest a lot in me to get me over there. And I was just sitting in that state for months and not being able to move myself out of it. And this is where I really started to realize the power of the emotion and the power of the mental noise to actually, really address what was going on, because I felt like I knew intellectually what needed to be done with the tools that I'd learned at the clinic. But this deep sense of shame and guilt and fear that was just overriding my whole system wasn't allowing me to actually do the things that I needed to do, wasn't allowing me to sit up and meditate, wasn't allowing me to
yeah.
just be with my breath. And that's when I realized, we can't deal with the 5% of the conscious brain. We've got to deal with this 95% of the unconscious brain, because that's where it all sits. And
Mhm.
unless you kind of dive into that and deal with that and release that burden, the nervous system is just not going to play ball with a recovery.
Yeah, that's exactly what I have found as well. Or it's like if you get that temporary relief, it like comes back with a vengeance, which is a little bit of what you described. When if you don't mind me asking, when you were in that like relapse place, was it like the pain that returned, or was it almost more of the emotional state? Okay, so it's the pain. Yeah.
Yeah, all of the
Hmm.
above. So
Okay.
it came back online within a couple of days. It was
Wow.
horrific, like just bang, just straight back on.
Mhm.
But this time, yeah, there was that much heavier emotional burden, and then the real suppression of emotion, not wanting to tell my parents what I'd done, not wanting to open
Mhm.
up about that, going into my cave, swallowing the emotion. And it's almost like, I think of it like a spring inside of you, and the more you suppress, the more you're
Mm,
compressing this spring, and the more the pressure is building, and how it's going to explode or how it's going to manifest, you know, time will tell. But you don't want to get to that point where it ticks over. I mean, it was already causing me a lot of distress, but it wasn't until I started speaking it out eventually, when I went back to the clinic a second time to basically work through everything. And I was hitting roadblocks around the 6 week mark, where I was like, I should be making progress now. This is where I was making progress before. But it was this whole belief system of, I'm not worthy of getting better on the basis of the stupid actions that I've made before.
mm, mhm,
And, and then the what ifs as well, around what if I relapse again? What will people think of me? And the whole primary concern was around what will people think of me, as opposed to what do I need to do to get better? And that whole complex was really, really a big challenge. until I started to actually speak and just get it out of my system and actually start talking about how I was feeling.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes. So you went back to the clinic a second time.
Mm.
And
Yep.
was it did the clinic then bring in that component? Is that how you connected those dots, or was that
Yeah.
somewhere you connected it separately?
A little bit. That's where I started to connect dots. I think that's probably where I started to get into Joe
Mhm,
Dispenza's work. I started to
mhm,
get into reading more mind body stuff. Um, they did a phenomenal job again of getting me to the point where I was physically great. I'd made quite a bit of progress, but I got back to the clinic. This time it took about 4 months, and I got back to Australia, and pretty soon after, I had to, it was in the middle of COVID, and I had to go into quarantine for 2 weeks. We were living in Australia, and you got to stay in a hotel with no
mhm.
windows, with, in this box for 2 weeks, having just kind of gotten better. And
Yeah.
that's the whole environmental piece of like, it was just the worst thing at the wrong time. And
Mhm.
I basically, um, all of that fear response came back online.
Mm,
What's going to happen if I relapse? I don't have
mhm.
the supports here. I'm a long way from it. What if I stuff it up again myself? What are people going to think of me? And that was probably the most pervasive thought. What are people going to think of me if I, if something happens again, or if I don't actually get myself sorted? And, and that was the point where, yeah, the symptoms started to come back online again when I was back at home. And I was like, I just need to get myself sorted. I can't be relying on other people. It was this
Mhm.
realization that, I am the primary agent in my healing. And I saw this great quote, a couple of years ago. It was quite pivotal for me. And it was, no one is coming to save you. Get up.
Yes, I've seen that.
And
Yes.
it's direct, and it hit me.
Mhm.
It really hit me. And it was like, oh wow. And initially it's this sense of burden and responsibility. But then you sit with it and you go, then there's a sense of empowerment and possibility. And because I'm responsible and I can actually do something about this. And I was really, really fortunate at that stage to get introduced through a new chiropractor back home where I lived in Newcastle in Australia. And he taught me this technique called Heart Speak. And it's a
Mm,
really simple tool
mhm.
of basically just being able to bypass the conscious brain, go in and just learn to feel feelings again, and really just learn to clear feelings. So clearing the emotional charge and really realizing that emotion is energy in motion, and it's a
Yes.
finite resource. And if you feel it, you heal it, you let it go, and it doesn't actually exist in your sphere anymore. And that was the whole learning and relearning. And sometimes they say the longest journey is from your head to your heart. And
Mm,
for me, that was a long hike, because I'd been so shut off from that part of myself for such a long time, that relearning this process of feeling feelings and clearing the emotion and peeling back the layers and releasing the burden and the pressure on that spring that I spoke about before, to
mhm.
allow that range to come back. And I remember at one point I'd done these techniques for about 4 or 5 months, and I hadn't cried for the best part of the 4 years that at that stage that I'd had CRPS. It just
Mhm.
wasn't, I was just that, real suppression, stoic male type energy, which was really quite quite horrific. And yeah, I just reached this point where I basically was going through these processes, and I was doing them most days to get myself, and it was really easing the burden on my nervous system. I was noticing massive changes in how I was feeling, both from an emotional perspective, but then seeing it manifest physically, because my nervous system was coming back online and functional again. And
Mhm.
I basically just broke down and cried, and I cried for the best part of 3 or 4 hours. And it
Mm.
was such this overwhelm, and like I was having almost convulsions with all this energy coming out of my system. And it was just a total sense of relief. And it was amazing to experience, because on the other side of that was just this state of bliss and calm. And it was like my nervous system had just surrendered and actually let go of all the built up tension over all that time. And it was a real realization in that moment that when you suppress emotion, it doesn't disappear. It just builds up. And it's that great Freud quote of suppressed emotion never dies. It gets buried
Mm,
alive and it
mhm.
comes forth later in uglier ways. And that was the uglier ways was the manifestation of CRPS, but the resolution came through feeling the feelings and moving through it.
Oh, I love that so much. I like this is my favorite part of the work is the leaning in to the feelings, the allowing them expression. And I want since you mentioned that you were more on the stoic side of the not feeling feelings. I'll have a lot of clients who are like, but I cry all the time, but I'm very emotional and my
Mm,
pain hasn't gone away. Like, what the
mm,
heck?
mm,
And what I find, and I just want to point this out, is that usually, let's say, they find themselves crying every day. A lot of times they're crying about having intense emotions. So the superficiality of it is coming out, like they're upset that they have a feeling.
mm.
And so they're expressing the feeling about having a feeling. They're never getting to the actual feeling that's looking to be expressed. And so I just
Yeah.
want to point that out for someone who's like, because this was me, I'm like, but I'm so emotional. Like,
That-
please, like, I cry all the time.
I,
Um,
I
is
think,
yeah, it's like, well, I'm crying about something else. So I'm not actually connecting. Like the feeling has to be embodied. You have to be connected to what's within. And I always give the example of uh someone with like anger management issues. I'm like, if it was simply like expressing the emotion, then people wouldn't
mm,
have anger management issues because they would be expressing their anger all the time. It's
yeah.
not. You have to be connected to what's underneath.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful point. And I think what was really powerful about this technique, it's an emotional stress clearing
Mhm.
technique. So when we think about we identify a symptom or a whether that's a physical symptom or whether it's an emotion in our body that's causing us distress at the time. We identify what that is. We can do that through muscle testing, or you can really just feel into it as well,
Mhm.
to be able to basically treat that as like a stressor. And if, the way you were talking about it, it might be that peripheral mind response to what's actually going on. And we want to just dissolve that which is on the surface so that we can actually get to what's down deeper. And it's a matter of leaning in and basically clearing the stress on that. And then what the process is then pivoting to the opposite positive emotion. So we take ourselves into a state where we are sort of feeling the opposite positive emotion, where we've got that higher view, the higher frequency, the higher energy to be able to then observe what's going on and take a more bird's eye view of what's happening. And then we can go and look deeper. Um, and I think sometimes that is more of the broad brush approach of just sweeping away the energy that
Mm,
presents itself. The more targeted approach that I take with clients, and the thing that is often more foundational, is dealing with what I describe as these nervous system splinters that have been
mm,
inserted at different points along the timeline of someone's trajectory, where they didn't seem like much at the time, but over time they become infected and they start to build up
yeah.
this sickness within the nervous system because it perpetuates, and we start playing out the old patterns that influences our behavior. It starts to form our identity, and before we know it, we don't actually know how we got to where we are. So let's go back in time all the way on the timeline to reach the point where this sort of insertion happened, and that's utilizing a lot of Dr. Espin's techniques that I've learnt and I've been doing and helping facilitate some of his 3-day seminars here in Australia, which are similar to those really transformative meditation retreats. But he uses a whole
Hmm.
bunch of different modalities, and I've learned his method to be able to apply it in an individual context now for people to take them back to those, the greatest moment of fear. What is your greatest fear? What is that greatest moment of guilt that you're holding on to? And
Mm,
where did that come up? And so often it's not something that the thing that people would consciously come to mind, because once you drop them into a meditative state and you take them through that process, it might be something that's quite trivial. It might be something that, but the subconscious will throw that up and it'll say, here it is. And
mhm,
you're really taking that splinter out and removing the destabilization in the nervous system in a way that you can see phenomenal transformations happening in a really, really short space of time. In that room
mhm,
when we've got 250 people and we see people having what would be perceived as spontaneous remissions from physical illness and physical
mhm,
healings, because the nervous system just goes, oh, I don't have to stress anymore. You know, we don't,
Yes.
we've reframed that memory that's been causing so much distress. And it's
Mhm.
phenomenal to see and be able to be in the presence and experience that and facilitate that, like, just brings me so much joy.
Oh, that is amazing. I love that metaphor of the splinter. That's like such a perfect way to put it. And I also just like love that you touch on like sometimes what comes up can feel so trivial. I find often clients who have been to a lot of therapy are more challenging to work with because it's like, when you try to dive into anything, their conscious brain is like, well, it's because of abandonment issues. And it's like, no, like, and when you really drop
Mm,
in and it's like, oh, it's because like my sister broke my crayon when I was 3. And it's like,
yeah.
yes, right. And it's like that then the response, the like you just see, like you can tell when someone's up in their brain versus like actually connected to what their nervous system is holding on to. And it's like we get to make room for it all and how the nervous system interpreted a situation, even if it feels trivial to you. It wasn't trivial to your nervous system and it wasn't
Mm,
trivial to your 3-year-old self.
yeah. And I think it's useful to sort of understand how basically the brain, when it interprets a memory, is seeing it in a binary sense, where is this a positive experience, is this a negative experience, and it takes that file and it stores it at the time and it puts it into your memory bank in such a way that it is defined as positive or negative. And sometimes even having a really strong positive charge on something isn't a very beneficial thing as well, because you have a certain desire or a certain craving for that to be maintained. So when we talk about going through and dealing with timeline therapy and reprocessing memory, it's around neutralizing that. So you've still got the memory and it's still a beautiful memory, but it's not driving your behavior from a subconscious perspective. And, there's none of that imbalance in your life that comes off the back
Mhm.
of having those traumatic events.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to be respectful of your time. Are you good to go a little longer or are
Yeah,
you
yeah,
okay?
yeah, all
So
good.
yeah, if you don't mind, I want to go back to what you were talking about. I think it was the heart speak. Because you said
Mm.
something interesting that I haven't heard of the going to the opposite emotion. Would you be willing to take like an example through that
Mm.
process?
I can run a process on you if you'd like. It would only take 5 minutes.
Sure.
So basically, yeah, the if we think about and what I just spoke about,
Mhm.
the memory piece where we throw up a memory
Mhm.
and that sort of comes out and we're identifying that it's got a negative charge on it. And with Heartspeak, we're not thinking about the story. We're just thinking purely about what the emotion is. So we're not needing to attach a story to it.
Mhm.
But when that emotion comes up, that emotion's likely attached to a memory somewhere in the nervous system. So when we feel into it and we reduce the intensity of the emotion that's present, then we can sort of let go and allow that just to be there. And what we're doing is then inserting a new frame or a new stimulus to that associated memory, for want of a better term, in the form of a positive emotion that almost replaces and updates the software and
Mhm.
I suppose neutralizes that
Mhm.
charge in a sense, if that makes sense, the way I've
Yeah.
described it. Yeah. So yeah, sure. So we'll do um, it's sort of like a 5 minute closed eye process, and this would just be an example of one peeling away one layer. Um, yeah. So if you close your eyes and just relax into your chair and taking deep breath in through the nose and out through the mouth. In through the nose and out through the mouth. In through the nose, and just dropping your awareness down into your chest on the exhale. All right. And just keep breathing And what we're looking for is feeling of anger. There was something that recently just really ticked you off, really stirred up that feeling of anger. Just go to that. Start feeling it. And make the facial expression of anger as well. Really clench your fists as well. Embody that anger in your posture. Tense up your arms. Make the fists angry facial expression and really feel into it. Intensify it as much as you can. Now let go of the story and just focus on where that anger is in your body. Really stir it as much as you can. Focus purely on the sensation. So out of 10, how intense is that right now?
Just 6.
Cool. Just stay with it. Keep intensifying it. As angry as you can. Real rage. Keep stirring it up. Come back to your breath and just breathe into that feeling in your body. Full presence with the emotion, letting go of the story. And that energy should start to dissipate if you just stay with it. Out of 10, where are you now?
A 3.
Nice. Stay with it. Feel all of the 3. Stay super present. Keep feeling that 3, the rest of that 3. Feel it so you never have to feel it again. Breathing into it. Keep going. Every last bit of that anger. Where is it right now?
Like a 1,
Yeah,
0.
perfect.
Yeah.
Now just let go and relax. You can put your palms facing upward on your knees, keeping your eyes closed, chin back, chest up, and just letting go and allowing, surrendering. And now what you're going to feel is sense of joy pouring in through the top of your head, expanding you. All that joy. Bring a big smile to your face. Big, expansive smile as you feel so much joy pouring through. The strongest joy you could imagine. Stay with it. Drink it all in. Stay with it one more moment. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. How you feeling?
That's nice. Yeah. I like that. I like the bringing in the joy. That's
Yeah, that
awesome.
I like it for a few reasons.
Mhm.
it's such a beautiful tool to use in the moment when you
Hmm.
feel like you get you get I don't quite like the word trigger, when
I know
challenging
what you mean.
emotions
Yeah.
when challenging emotions do
Mm-mm.
surface, to just take five. All you need to do is take five, and you just go and you feel that emotion and you transmute it to the opposite positive, and something that might have impacted you for the day or a couple of days, or might
Mhm.
be a little spouse conflict that's going to perpetuate for a week. But if you just go through, just take a moment, you clear the emotion, and really transform your state. It's a powerful thing. Certainly for those moments where you're really suffering and you're really in the intense emotion, I found it just gave me that spaciousness. And
Mhm.
that's at the start of it. And then obviously, as I mentioned, once you get into the deeper layers, it can be super transformative as well.
Yeah, no, that's a really beautiful process. I take, I have a lot of the feeling it, and then I often bring people to like a sense of like safety and resourcing, but I haven't
Mm.
really taken it to that next level. So thank you for that. It's like really beautiful. I love learning new
No,
things.
I'm so glad. So do I. Yeah, I'm sure there's
Yeah.
plenty we could learn off
Oh
each
my
other. It's good.
gosh, I know. Well, thank you so much for this. And thank you for providing everyone a little taste of what you do. Hopefully everyone can even take themselves through that um as they're listening. And as much as you feel like comfortable to do something like that. And so where can people find more about you, what you do, work with you? And you mentioned some resources
Yes.
you have for people too.
Yeah, for sure. So they can find me on Instagram predominantly.
Mhm.
So my handle is Harry, so HarryMacansh. So Macansh is my surname. That's going to be the best place to find me. I've collated a free resource for people to get. So and that will basically summarize the methodology I use, or the framework that I use when I'm working with clients. So that's how to calm your chronic pain without more medication, even if you've been
Mhm.
stuck for years. So that is the thesis based off my own experience and being able to implement that with clients as well. So yeah, if they reach out via Instagram, and if they just send me a DM with the word or the name Andrea,
Mhm.
then I'll pass along that free resource, and they can have a look and potentially chat more.
Awesome. That sounds great. Yeah, you have some amazing reels on there. So go ahead and check out, everyone check out his Instagram. Thank you so, so much for your time, for sharing your wisdom, your story. I think it is so helpful for us to hear other people's stories and then to see where you've taken it. It's amazing. It's amazing for you sharing all this wisdom and knowledge that you've gained through your own experience. So thank you for what you do.
I appreciate it so much. Yeah, and as I mentioned to you, seeing what you're doing on your socials and the impact you're having is inspirational. So I think it's a very collaborative
Yes.
industry that we're in, which is really a beautiful place to be. So thanks so much for the opportunity, and it's been a real pleasure to be able to share some insights with people.
Absolutely. Thank you.